That leads to a very important question. When you kissed it, did you give it tongue?
Good for Ben and Jerry's for trying, but I think that's a swing and a miss.
And you want to eat this in the car during our road trip?
Because it is in the ethos of Americana.
The official dessert of the Smart Drivel podcast.
It was wrinkled, but wrinkled in a cool way.
And who doesn't want to have dinner in the midst of a genteel food fight?
It's an existential highway to nirvana. Here we go again, everyone. Smart Drivel coming to you live, recorded, and delayed, whatever you want. Kurt Schneider, co-host with
Jon Ellenthal, co-host. And how can you be live and recorded, Kurt? It's a bit oxymoronic, eh?
It's the magic of the new era we live in, John.
Well, as you pointed out before, Smart Drivel is an oxymoron. So you took us back to our first principles there, Kurt.
The beginnings. And what we are anchored in at the end of the day is an oxymoron, not in hypocrisy, but an oxymoronicalism.
It's kind of like going back and kissing the metaphorical blarney stone. Speaking of the blarney stone, Kurt, I have two fun facts for you. The first is, according to TripAdvisor, the blarney stone is considered the germiest tourist attraction on Earth. That would actually be a pretty good podcast topic for us. And secondly, last March, because of the pandemic, the Blarney Stone shut down for the first time in its 600-year history, although it has since reopened. I think they do all sorts of spraying and disinfecting throughout the day. And with that, I want to thank you, Kurt, for bringing us back to our oxymoronical roots, because as you know, that is our true north. And it's a good thing we found true north, Kurt. You know why? Because today, you and I are going on a road trip, and we're going to need to know how to get from place to place. So knowing true north is going to help us, unless, of course, we just use Waze.
Or if we want to go south. I guess knowing true north is help you because you just go the opposite way.
That is the whole idea, Kurt, yes. You would have been quite the seafarer back in the day with that kind of insight.
If we did a road trip, the Blarney Stone might be on it. Have you ever kissed the Blarney Stone?
No, I've been to Ireland, but I have not been to the Blarney Stone. Have you?
Yes. So I kissed the Blarney Stone, and you have to be like held down. Like you go up in this castle and you sort of go on your back and upside down and you kiss it. And then you realize that a gazillion other people have kissed it.
So that leads to a very important question. When you kissed it, did you give it tongue?
Well, that's the issue. I think a lot of other people had. Reminds me when I was in Jerusalem, and I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and there was apparently the tomb of Jesus, and everyone goes in to kiss it. And I went in to kiss it, and my guide said, "Whoa!" And I said, "What?" She said, "You don't want to do that." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because millions of pilgrims come and they do French kiss to the tomb."
Well, we're going to have to start our road trip where we are, which is at home. And you and I both live in the New York area. But before we leave the New York area, is there a place in New York that you've always wanted to visit but haven't? And that could be the start of our road trip, Kurt?
Rayo's.
Ooh, I love Rayo's. I've never been. We have to go to Rayo's. I eat their pasta and sauce all the time, but that can't be the same. How is it possible that someone like you, a New York foodie, cultural, iconic, kind of interested, history of New York kind of guy, that was a bunch of words. How have you never been to Rayo's?
I think you got to work it, right? It's by invite only, and I never worked it. I should have worked it.
So right now, Kurt, in front of our listeners, you and I are going to commit to having dinner at Rayo's sometime over the next year. Do you accept?
Yes.
All right, so start working on that. So we're in New York. I'm going to propose that we head north to Vermont. You ever been to Ben and Jerry's in Vermont?
The actual place? No.
The actual place they make
in Burlington, but no.
So there is actually something called the Ben and Jerry's Flavor Graveyard in Waterbury, Vermont. And they actually have headstones for flavors that they've retired. And when learning about the Ben and Jerry's Flavor Graveyard, I saw a remembrance to a flavor that I had never heard of before called sweaty balls.
Oh, no, they did not.
So inspired by the SNL sketch, Ben and Jerry, until 2011, had a flavor called sweaty balls. And I think the key components were like rum flavor and malt balls. So it's got to be the first time an SNL skit inspired an ice cream flavor.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Good for Ben and Jerry's for trying, but I think that's a swing and a miss. I think it's interesting that you decided to go northeast because we're going to run into water at some point. It doesn't seem to be too efficient.
Well, you know what we can do in our car? It's a special car. You can turn it around.
But that's not efficient.
This is our podcast. We can be as logical or inefficient as we want. So, Kurt, I'm going to propose we go south after Vermont, since you want to go south. Where are we going, Kurt?
We're going to head, if you're doing a road trip, you have to go, which is very cool.
Kurt, we're doing a road trip. That's what this episode is about.
Well, by the way, then we're getting tons of funyuns and chili cheese Fritos.
What's a funyun?
You don't know what a funyun is?
Well, I don't know that I don't know. I'm willing to start with, I may not remember a funyun.
It's supposed to replicate sort of a fried onion, like an onion ring in a chip, though I doubt there's any onion or anything else in there besides this air or whatever. But funyuns are
on just salads and stuff, right?
No. Funyuns are a bag of chips, like you find them next to the Doritos and everything.
Pork rinds. Is there actually pork in pork rinds?
Yes, and actually pork rinds are healthier for you than any other chip.
Yeah, but that's like saying smokeless tobacco is better for you than smoking cigarettes.
It's all on the scale. That's true. I was in Mexico in 1977 and I went to a wrestling match. And outside, the guys were selling sheets of pig, basically skin that was, fried. And you get a big sheet of it, eat it. And that was pretty darn good as you're watching the wrestling.
And you want to eat this in the car during our road trip?
Yeah, down. And I think we should go to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, near Kitty Hawk, where the Wright brothers invented the old flying machine.
Have you ever seen a satellite image of Outer Banks, like from a satellite? It is the most fragile looking spit of land imaginable. It's exposed. So if we're going to go there, is there anything fun to eat?
Well, I think you got to stop in Maryland and maybe get some crabs, and you get the hammer and you pam, 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 right? So I think that would be good. And then we can go to DC.
I don't know Pam. Is she someone we visit in Maryland?
Bam. And then you go to Washington, D.C. and drink some Natty Bows, some National Bohemian beers.
So we probably want to go there before we go to the Outer Banks. Right. I know that efficiency is we're optimizing for efficiency here. I remember a great dinner I had in South Carolina. We were visiting my younger brother who was graduating from Marine Camp Basic Training, Parris Island. He was a Marine reservist. And we went out to dinner, and I think we were having shrimp. But you're in for a great dinner when there's a roll of paper towels on the table and a big hole in the middle of the table to throw whatever you're not going to eat. I think the ideal dinner table should have a hole in it so you can just throw extra stuff right in there. And
brown paper all over it so you rip it off when you're done.
I suspect there's going to be a food theme to the places we stop. I would like to bang a left. I guess if we're heading south, it would be a right on our way south. And I would like to go to Memphis, Tennessee, where I spent a few years in the early 90s. And despite being a vegetarian, vegan, borderline person today, if you and I were in Memphis, Tennessee, and there were beef brisket barbecue available, I would chow down like a vegan has never chowed down on that beef brisket barbecue. And it is worth the detour because surprisingly, Memphis is much further west than you think it is. So I have once again introduced a navigational inefficiency into our road trip.
We're going to skip south of the border in South Carolina, though.
So what happens to south of the border? Pedro says, is that open during the pandemic?
Oh, yeah. I was there 5 months ago.
And what did Pedro say?
Stop at south of the border?
For those of you who don't know, if you've never made the trip down the eastern seaboard to Florida, as you approach south of the border, just on basically the North Carolina southern border and the South Carolina northern border, there's this place called south of the border. And they promote it for like 200 miles. And every single mile you see another billboard. Pedro says, but it goes on endlessly.
Just like when you're going west on I-90 and you see for Wall Drug, Same thing. When you start hitting like Wisconsin and then you're going further west, Wall Drugs in South Dakota, right on 90.
What is Wall Drugs all about? I don't know this one.
Wall Drug is a drugstore. And I don't know, it's near the Mitchell Corn Palace as well. Also right off of 90, also, which has a lot of signs. There's a lot of uniquely American things, like the Museum of the Biggest Ball of Twine. There's a lot of bizarre things that people put out there, which I love museums. I think I could skip some of those.
So I feel bad that we've gotten to the upper Midwest, not because there's not great stuff in the upper Midwest, but we really shouldn't leave the Southeast until you and I visit the Florida Keys or someplace near it so that we can have what, Kurt?
Key lime pie.
Key lime pie, which is the official dessert of the Smart Drivel podcast, is a fantastic and fabulous, and you can have it sweet or you can have it tart. Kurt, what kind of guy are you?
Tart all the way. It's got to be limey, limey, limey.
Which is different than calling someone a limey bastard, because I think that's more closer to a racial slur, right?
No. Do you know why they're called limeys, by the way?
Because they had lime in their quinine water when they were trying to prevent malaria?
Very close. They
ate limes to avoid scurvy?
Yes, the British Navy. You are correct. The British Navy ate limes so they did not have scurvy.
Is that considered a slur when you call someone a limey bastard? Because the word bastard doesn't sort of connote something nice.
No, but what if you say to someone like, oh, yeah, John, you cheeky bastard? That's kind of a compliment.
Look, tone, obviously. So when you call someone from France a frog, is that insulting?
Yes.
Okay. Don't do that. Where does that come from, Kurt?
They eat frogs.
Oh, and that's the reason they're called frogs, because they eat frogs?
Yes.
We eat pork rinds. People don't call us pork rinders.
Yeah, but the British found the fact that they ate frogs really kind of gross. So they became... So you had the limeys and you had the frogs.
All right. So you and I are now in the Southeast enjoying... Maybe we'll be at Joe's Stone Crabs enjoying some stone crabs. And then we will have a delicious dessert of key lime pie on the tarty end of the spectrum.
Well, then we're shooting up to Tampa St. Pete and going to the Dali Museum there, which is fantastic.
Salvador Dali. What makes you a fan of his work?
Because he wanted to paint his dreams, is what he would say, what he sees in his dreams, and he did. And so I think the fact that he tried to just put down the inanity of the world into a painting is pretty cool.
Inanity. I love that. Well done, Kurt.
I don't know if it's a real word, but there you go.
No, I think it works. I think it works.
It's canyonic.
What city in the United States, in your view, is the best city to have dinner in?
New York City, bar none.
It's certainly a fabulous choice. I have a different choice. I believe the best city in the U.S. for dinner, and look, San Francisco's great, New York's great, Chicago's great, but for me, it is New Orleans. The best single dinner that I remember ever having was at a famous New Orleans restaurant. I don't remember the name. It may have been Brennan's. So I had red snapper surrounded by crawfish, and that was probably 25 years ago. And it just came up in conversation again today. New Orleans, for me, is the best city in America for dinner.
Acme Oyster House, fantastic.
Not a big oyster guy. They're slippery little devils. That being said, if you put enough cocktail sauce on it and horseradish, you could put that on a brick, and I probably would enjoy eating it.
But so this road trip has quickly devolved into an Epicurean adventure rather than seeing sights and stuff.
Salvador Dali, the Ben & Jerry's Flavor Cemetery.
What music are we listening to in the car?
I think it's going to be 70s rock, Kurt. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of Creedence Clearwater Revival. But you know what also is okay for road trips, though? Elvis.
I don't know about that. I don't know about Elvis. I mean, I love Elvis. I guess maybe I don't love Elvis now that I say it. But do you want to go to Graceland?
I've never been there, yes. And I would play Paul Simon's album, Graceland, which I think is one of the perfect albums. We've talked about this. There's probably 3 or 4 perfect albums. Graceland is one of them.
So what would draw you to wanting to see Graceland?
Because it is in the ethos of Americana.
Oh, it is in the ethos of Americana, all right. The first time I was there, and I will tell you that I have been there more times than I care to remember. When I first stopped, it's on Elvis Presley Boulevard. His birth home which is in Tupelo, Mississippi, is also on Elvis Presley. I don't know if it's Boulevard down there because it's rather rural.
And we'd listen to Van Morrison's Tupelo Honey, a great song.
There you go. Would we go to the Hollywood that Mark Cohn sang about in Walking in Memphis?
Yes.
But back to Graceland, the first time I was there, I didn't yet live in Memphis, nor did I ever think I was going to live in Memphis. But we pulled up and there was a strip mall right across the street from Graceland where you could buy a photocopy of Elvis Presley's last will and testament. And I realized I had reached the heart of Americana. Also across the street is his plane, the Lisa Marie, with his famous lightning bolt TCB taking care of business slogan on the tail. And then they drive you in a little jitney kind of bus across the street to Graceland where everyone has the exact same reaction to the house. Oh, really? I thought it was much bigger. But yes, it is a American thing to do. It is a pure slice of Americana.
Well, it's part, as I said, it's part of our ethos. I think we can touch it and feel it in our soul.
So we've been to Graceland.
Yeah.
The question is where we go next. So Memphis is actually due south of St. Louis, 300 miles due south of St. Louis. And I did drive to St. Louis on a couple of occasions while living in Memphis, once to see the Mets play the Cardinals and once to see the Rangers play the St. Louis Blues. And on the way to St. Louis, you drive through Missouri and you stop at Lambert's Cafe, home of the Throwed Rolls. And when there's a sign that says stop at Lambert's, home of the Throwed Rolls, you want to see what's going on with the Throwed Rolls.
Yeah.
And they are constantly baking these hot cross buns. And as soon as they come out of the oven, they're brought into the dining room where they throw them across the dining room to their customers. And so you're having a lovely time and there are rolls flying across the room over your head. And who doesn't want to have dinner in the midst of a genteel food fight, Kurt?
For sure. Oh my goodness, I never heard about that. If we're doing a road trip, I've never been to Mississippi. I want to go south all the way to the Gulf of Mexico in Mississippi and Alabama. I'd like to do that area.
There is something really beautiful. First of all, Mississippi is a beautiful state.
I'm sure every state's got some stunning beauty.
I think Mississippi is an exceptionally beautiful state. And there is something called the Natchez Trace, which is this beautiful historic forest trail that runs from Natchez, Mississippi, all the way up to Nashville, Tennessee. It was created originally by Native Americans who used it for hunting, and then later explorers and traders used it as well. But it's really beautiful, the Natchez Trace. You know, Mississippi is probably the most complicated word that the most number of young Americans can spell. It's sort of insight into how learning actually works. If you turn it into something fun and entertaining, people can learn all sorts of things.
How did that become the standard for pickup football as how long it needs before you can rush the quarterback?
I don't know, but it's pretty clever. It's a unit of time measurement, which is pretty cool. I have no idea how it happened. Do you realize that we're attempting to make a road trip, largely at this point of the United States, and we have barely gotten west of the Mississippi River, Kurt? Pick a destination for us west of the Mississippi River.
Route 66, but we got to get to Texas.
Where do you want to stop in Texas?
Everywhere.
Really?
But I want to get to El Paso and Laredo and San Antonio.
Kurt, as I walked out in the streets of Laredo, one day, I spied a young cowboy, all wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. Do you know the song, The Streets of Laredo, about a young cowboy?
I just heard it the other day. The cowboy's dead.
Well, I think he's dying in the song.
Yeah.
Right? All dressed in white linen. It's not how cowboys typically dress unless something's really wrong. Could you imagine a bunch of cowboys in linen after Labor Day, no less?
Well, and if it's white, it's also after Labor Day terrible, and it wrinkles too much.
Yeah, linen, I think that's a difficult fabric. Do you have a lot of linen clothing?
There was a time I got into linen because it was the whole shabby chic, same with like your couch was supposed to be shabby chic, and linen was kind of shabby chic because it was wrinkled, but wrinkled in a cool way. And of course, it breathes beautifully.
Yeah, it's a great fabric, but it's a pain in the ass to take care of. I could see you dressed like in a linen suit, pretending to be Don Johnson back in the 80s.
Ha! No.
I'm going to avoid linen going forward. So we're in Texas.
And now we're in California.
No, wait. We have to stop somewhere on the way.
Arizona.
I want to stop in Colorado because you know how big highways have mile markers?
Yeah.
Well, one of the north-south freeways in Colorado,
which we know are oddly numbered from a previous podcast.
North-south, but the mile markers are not because they have to be true to the miles. And
some miles are even
numbers.
Yeah.
Mile marker 420 is actually mile marker 419.99. Do you know why?
Yeah, marijuana probably, huh?
Everyone kept stealing the damn sign. Yeah. So they changed it to 419.99. And now no one stole it.
It's very smart.
Yeah, it's a creative solution.
But if we want to drive, we obviously should do the PCH from LA to Big Sur or backwards. We should go.
You want us to drive backwards for hundreds of miles. That is some effed up shit, Kurt.
Or the other way is what I meant.
That would be dangerous, and we would probably spill our pork rinds.
And then going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park, Montana, which is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, when you get west of St. Louis, you realize this country, and we're not even talking about road tripping, by the way. I'd like to road trip in Australia. I'd like to road trip in Indonesia. I'd like to road trip in France. I'd like to road trip, frankly, in Russia to see what it's all about. But we're just talking about this country. You see how massive it is and how we are so ethnocentric in the Northeast to realize that this is, going from 53rd Street to 78th Street. Oh, great. That's a mile and a tenth or something, a mile and a quarter. That's not like being out in Montana and South Dakota and Colorado and Arizona and Utah. Holy good night is a big country.
Did you just quote Batman?
Yes.
Holy good night. Well, there's no question that I did spend 1 year going to school in Colorado and I just loved it. I have been to a lot of the states in the U.S., but I have not been to Montana.
They call it Big Sky Country for a reason. You look up and all you see is sky. It is gorgeous.
But speaking of road tripping internationally, I was watching a show last night that was originally a documentary created by some British company of this couple and their family who bought an old castle in France and they turned it into a destination for weddings and events. And it seems like it's very popular. I've only seen one episode, but one weekend they threw the kids in the car and they drove to Giverny.
Yeah.
I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And they went to Claude Monet's house and Claude Monet's gardens, which he painted hundreds of times. And he looked at the water lilies and it made me really want to go there. But that's for another discussion because right now we're in the American West. And we've got to wrap up soon, but I want to add a couple more destinations to the Kurt Jon road trip across the U.S. as it turned out across the U.S.
Like Pike Place Market in Seattle, where everyone should go and see the fish being thrown.
Yes, they should throw rolls there too.
At the same time, and then you get fish and rolls.
Well, it should be Pikes Peak, home of the throwed fish.
Yes, exactly.
Do you know that the original Starbucks is located right across the street from Pikes Market, which I almost call Pikes Peak, which is in Colorado Springs, and we should have stopped there as well?
I made a pilgrimage there way back in about 1997, Pikes Market, to see the original Starbucks, because I'm a big Starbucks fan.
And if you'll recall, at that original Starbucks, the Starbucks logo is a little different than the logo now is. In fact, it is a mermaid on the logo, but she is a bit more revealing in that particular Starbucks than in the now current corporate logo.
That's because grunge rock allows you to do that.
Well, it was a different time, and at that point, there were just a few stores.
Smells like Teen Spirit to me.
Nirvana. You got it. Kurt Cobain. But you're a namesake of Kurt Cobain.
Other way around, I'm older than he.
Yes. How old would Kurt Cobain be today?
Well, he died when he was 27, and he died 27 years ago, so 54.
You sure it was 27 years ago? You knew that, like
Nope.
You knew what you were talking about.
Nope, just made it up.
Kurt, he died 27 years ago.
How about that?
In fact, we just passed the 27th anniversary. It was April 5th, 1994. So he would have been younger than you, albeit not by much.
There were a lot of famous rock stars who all died when they were 27.
Do you think that played into Kurt Cobain's suicide mission?
Uh-huh.
How old was Janis Joplin?
27.
Can you name others that died at 27?
Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison. I could go on.
And you think this is more than a coincidence? You think this is like some sort of suicide pact?
No, I don't think it's a suicide pact. I think it's something that has to do with like, it's an existential highway to nirvana, no pun intended, that's out there. And I think you have to be on the 27 highway to get there. Isn't that the highway out in the Hamptons, 27?
You would know better than I. You were the one back in the 80s wearing your linen suit trying to be Don Johnson out in the Hamptons.
All right, we have to wrap up this road trip.
Kurt, we have taken a weird and winding road trip that more often than not, you're right, did involve food, which is enough to send me out on the road any day of the week. So thank you for the fun road trip. Perhaps in the future, we'll do an episode where we do a bit more global road trip.
We could take Dean Moriarty from On the Road by Jack Kerouac and take him to a different country and see what happens. Let him loose.
Let him loose. And we'll leave it right there for this week. Kurt and I will be back next week with another brand new episode of Smart Drivel. Until then, we hope your week is filled with Smart Drivel. Goodbye, everybody.
Bon voyage.